All right, Pops, just the other day, we did a video on new versus used. What's a better value in today's market? Well, today we have new data from Edmunds, and wow. They are helping to quantify, so thank you to the team over there, quantify the used car shortage. We had a chip shortage a couple years ago that led to a new car shortage, and now we have a used car shortage. And yeah, Dad, this is pretty shocking data from Edmunds.
It is, and what's most shocking about it is that, when you really dig deeply into it, what we're living through could very easily really be the new normal when it comes to what retail pricing is going to be on pre-owned vehicles for the next several years.
Yeah, you're spot on. So in that video we had that came out earlier this week, we said that new vehicles, for the most part, are a better value than used vehicles because used vehicles are still commanding such a high price.
Yes.
Let's dig into this a little bit more. So Edmunds data shows that used vehicle transaction prices are actually starting to soften. They're starting to come down a little bit.
Yes.
They've gone down 6.4% year over year for the first quarter of 2023. But Dad, that's after... or that takes into consideration the 5-year increase of 44%.
Yes.
So we're down 6.4%, but over the past 5 years, we're up 44%. That's part of why we said new is a better value than used. Where things get a little iffy here is when we talk about more price attainable vehicles.
I think what they're really saying is that used car values in the last 5 years went up over 50%, and with that 6.4% decline, which is somewhat significant, people are still paying 44% more for vehicles today than they would have 5 years ago for those comparable vehicles. That's a staggering sum. And there's nothing in here that we're about to go through that indicates that it's going to get better anytime soon.
That's actually the interesting data that Edmunds has put forward with regards to lease returns, trade-ins, things like that. We haven't had a great source for that type of information. So we've been talking about the expectation is that lease returns are down, that trade-ins are down, that off-rental vehicles have come back into the market. Edmunds actually quantifies that. Before we do, though, Dad, I want to read out this one section from the report. The pool of affordable used vehicles is shrinking, but the used market continues to offer value compared to new. Sort of. And we're going to break it down a little bit more.
Yes.
They're really talking about the fact that you can't buy an under $20,000 new car. You can't. 1% of new cars sold in the first quarter of 2023 were under $20,000. Now, 30.6% of used cars sold were under $20,000. But compare that to 5 years ago when 60.5% of used cars, sold were less than $20,000. You can start to see, sure, if you are at a sub $20,000 price point, used is a better value than new, not because it actually is, but because it's the only option.
Yes, because manufacturers realistically have done away with that option as a new car. So the only availability for under $20,000 cars moving forward is going to be pre-owned cars, simply because manufacturers have basically stopped building sub $20,000 brand new cars. They have said, you want a car under $20,000, you're buying a used car. It's just that simple.
All right, Dad, you can sell your car on CarEdge. What's the deal?
The deal is you just plug in your VIN number and we'll get you offers from local dealers in minutes.
Seconds. CarEdge.com/sell.
Okay.
All right, 3 ways used cars get back into the market, which ultimately become options for you, me, and everyone that's watching this video. Off-lease vehicles that are returned, trade-ins, and vehicles from rental fleets. Those are 3 of the biggest sources for used vehicles. Lease volume, Dad. Lease return volume. 559,000 vehicles in Q1 2023 were returned.
Yes.
That's less than 1 million that were returned in Q1 2018. We have seen a precipitous decline. And to be very clear here, you can blame us for that. We tell everyone and their brother and sister and mother and father and aunt and uncle, don't just return your lease.
Yes.
We have a whole guide on what to do at Lease Ed. The fact that your lease is worth more or comparable to what your residual value is means you should just hold on to it. That's the smart financial decision. But that also means that 300,000 to 400,000 less vehicles are not in the market because of that.
And moving forward, since lease penetration has dropped from 33 to 35% of all vehicles sold 3 years ago were leased, okay, that number's dropped to about 16 to 18%, which means that going forward, there's going to be less lease returns naturally because there were less cars leased to begin with. So that number or that opportunity for pre-owned cars for dealerships and for customers out there has been drying up and will continue to dry up for the next several years until manufacturers decide to heavily support through incentives their leasing programs again.
TradeIns, Dad, that's the other way that dealers get inventory. The number of vehicles traded in for 2022 was 5.5 million vehicles. That compares to 6.2 million in 2018. So there are fewer people trading in a vehicle when they go to purchase a car. This is interesting because we're actually proponents of, we go to CarEdge.com/sell. We actually endorse shopping your trade-in before you trade it in. Now, dealers might beat those offers you get from Echo Park or CarMax or Carvana or whoever it is, but you need to go through those steps. And I'm not surprised there are fewer trade-ins because customers are being savvier about where they sell their vehicle. Well, and also they're holding on to vehicles to make sure that they've got transportation.
And the other thing to remember is that there were 15 to 18 million new vehicles globally that were scheduled to have been built over the previous 24 to 30 months that were not built due to supply chain issues, which means that there were 15 to 18 million new cars globally that didn't get sold. And a high percentage of those new cars, when they're sold, there's a pre-owned trade-in associated with them. That means those trade-ins didn't happen. So once again, we're left with fewer used vehicles out there that are being traded in.
The third indicator, Dad, rental car fleets. Historically, the average age of the rental car fleets out there, 1.9 years. That was back on March of 2019, in March of 2019. The average age of the fleet out there now for rental car companies, over 3 years old. There's a lot to unpack there. The primary one for the purpose of this video being rental car companies aren't taking cars and turning their fleets over, which is interesting because we have seen new vehicle fleet sales for the past year continue to rise up. So that's a trend I think we could see a shift on. There's so much to unpack there. One is also if you're going to go buy a previous rental vehicle that's like a 2019 that's now coming down, just please don't. Go read our guide back at CarEdge.com about buying rental cars. There's a lot to unpack with a rental car, but that's another source of inventory that hasn't been there for dealers.
And will continue to not be there for dealers. And some of the 1, 2, and 3-year-old low mileage pre-owned cars that have run through the auctions, those have been scooped up by a lot of the rental car companies. And they've added them to their rental car fleets, which leads to the fact that when they start thinning those fleets, they're slightly older vehicles with much higher mileage. It's not uncommon for the rental car companies to keep their vehicles in service to 60, 70, 75,000 miles on the odometer, where they were half of that in the past.
We'll link to the PDF report from Edmunds in the description down below. A lot of really good data for all of us to interpret. What this means is up for interpretation. However, I think we got it right with the title of the video. I think the used car shortage is going to be more prolonged and more significant than we may have imagined. And you know, it doesn't matter if fleet sales continue to go up by a couple 100,000 units month over month. Like, there were 18 million cars that weren't made. That's going to impact the market. There's going to be ripple effects for years to come.
Yes. And ultimately what it means, or what it might mean, is that the major drop in retail used car prices that some in the industry think will happen more than likely will not happen, and that someone might owe me a steak dinner instead of me owing someone else a steak dinner.
All right. I still don't agree with that. Just because... anyway, keep tuning in. Thank you, Pops.
Thank you, handsome.